do that, and I'm just
always so impressed by that.
I'll be really bad.
It's Colin just having some stragglers, I think. Oh no, there you are. Is it everyone? Do you think it's everyone? There's nobody hanging out. Cool. Okay, should we make a start? Hello, everybody. Thank you for coming. Welcome to Show and Tell number 7, which is mad. This is absolutely flying by. So lots to share this week, and we're going to have quite a few people chatting as well. So thankfully, less of me this time around. Who's been to one of these before? Almost everybody. Cool, that's really good. Thanks for keep coming back. So really quickly, short version of this is the reason we do show and tell is so that we can share progress, share what we're doing, try and help everybody get a bit of insight into the work as it's happening. It's also your opportunity to kind of point stuff out to us too. So don't be shy, kind of ask questions if there are things that are worrying you, particularly as we're getting closer and closer and closer to the 1st of April. Now's a good time to shout, and if we haven't thought about it, it's we can get it into our planning. Bit of jargon, we won't go too deep into this again. Hey folks, welcome. So we've talked about this before. This is just a little bit about the approach we do. The short version of this is it's all based on doing research with real people out in Buckinghamshire. So we test things early and we test them often, and colleagues today are going to be talking about some stuff we've been doing literally this morning out with colleagues, I think in Aylesbury Library today, testing some ideas that we had for a few bits of our service. The learning we get from that research is then fed back into the thing we're building, and it's fed back into our planning as well for other things we might need to come to in the future. I won't say much more than that. A little reminder of the thing we're trying to do. We're building a website, but it's not just a website. There's quite a few bits and pieces that go into making that work. So we need a content management system. That's the thing that people go into behind the scenes so that they can edit and publish the words that people see on pages, the videos, the images, the other bits and pieces that help our residents kind of do the things they need to do. We're pulling together a design system. What we mean by that is lots of repeatable bits and pieces we can use so that we have consistent ways for our users to kind of interact with the website. So if, for example, if they're trying to book something, booking a thing at a library hopefully will be very similar to booking a thing at another service. And those patterns and guides are things we're also sharing. Come on in, don't worry. Yeah, come. So those patterns and systems we're also sharing with third parties. So we don't just have one website. We've got 5 old council websites, but we then have something like 40 or 50 microsites and subdomains and other bits and pieces floating around. They all need to be redesigned and rebranded for the 1st of April to greater or lesser degrees. So we're going to try and get them as consistent as we can with this new thing we're building. It won't be identical, not by a long way, but we'll start to introduce some of that consistency as we go. And the content strategy, those are the kind of rules and the governance for the way that we create content, publish content, and work with subject matter experts in services who know the facts, they know the law, they know what's right. Colleagues in our team know how to write things that are clear and easy for people to understand, and between us, we'll figure out the right thing to publish to the web. So this website that's made up of all of those things will be easy to use. It will help residents and visitors kind of do things online where possible. And in the early days particularly, there's going to be a lot of signposting. So a lot of things are going to keep living on some of our old websites, which again will be rebranded so they look like the new council. But if you live like me in Aylesbury Vale and you pay your council tax to Aylesbury Vale, it will be the old Aylesbury Vale website that you'll use to do that bit of the transaction. You might find your way there from our new website. So our job, certainly in these early days, is to make that as painless as possible, as quick and as easy for people to get to those places that they need to be. Okay, so over the last 2 weeks, it's presented a little bit differently to last time, and the reason for that is there's lots going on, and we wanted to try and share some of the different things we're kind of working on all at the same time. So we've got a few streams of activity. So we've had folks in the team have been looking very specifically at homepage and navigation. Really important thing to get right, particularly as I've just explained there's a lot of signposting that we have to sort out for day one. So that signposting is only going to work if we've got a really clear what we call information architecture, so a way that we group things like headings and descriptions and titles of things so that it makes sense to our users when they come to that homepage, that they can quickly find where they need to be. So we've got a whole focus on that, and colleagues will explain the work that's been happening there. Libraries as a specific content area, folks who've been to a few of these have seen me constantly apologising to colleagues in libraries as we've been kind of pushing them back as other things have taken over. We have circled back around. We have spent some time with colleagues in libraries looking at that service and trying to figure out, of all the things that we want to do there, what's absolute priority, what stuff do we need to get right first, and we've kind of nailed some of that down and done some testing on that as well, which folks will talk to in a bit. Last but definitely not least, a really big chunk of work that's been going on is a jobs website, so a find and apply for a job service. So one of the first bits of our business that is kind of fully come together, I guess, for day one and has agreed some of its systems and processes is HR, and specifically HR recruitment as well. So we took advantage of that. We were able to kind of do some work there really early to be able to present by day one a single way of finding and applying for jobs. So again, folks will kind of work through the stuff that's been going on there. I think that's probably the last you're going to hear from me until right at the very end. So Boris, for the next bit.
Cool. Homepage and navigation. You've seen quite a bit of work done on that already, but we have been making small improvements to the homepage and to the navigation. So on the main website, one of the things we've done this sprint was we just added another category down here for the business I suppose, residents that might want to find that information. We're also making small tweaks to the way things look, just based on some of the feedback we get from people. One of the things we've made just today was to make the logo a little bit bigger. So small things like that we will keep improving on based on what we hear from the residents and from everyone else. Very important things we were doing this sprint was we were trying to make the homepage, a bit less cluttered. Because we heard from residents that they are sometimes a bit overwhelmed when they see all those links in one page. And one of the things we were trying out is to see if we could hide some of the less used categories under a Show More button. We've tried that before, but we've had previously feedback that the button was not very easy to find, so we made it really big and bold. Hopefully people can see it now. We tested that with what we call A/B testing. So we tried one prototype that had this button and then another prototype that was exactly the same but with all the categories expanded. And we sent like to 100 of residents that applied to our user research panel. We sent one of them, and to the other 100 we sent the other one. And we are getting some feedback based on that. So one of the things that you can see at the bottom, for example, we were asking how well you think that the page is organized. And interestingly, for example, the people that got the link with that button felt it was way better organized than the other half, even though the content is exactly the same. So things like that we're learning, and we will iterate the homepage based on those learnings. Another thing we did, which was, I suppose we talked about in the last sprint already, we shared the digital style guide that kind of explains how all these different pages that Ben was talking about, how they are interlinked and how they should look in a way that is quite consistent with each other. So we were sharing that this sprint with third-party suppliers that are in charge of both the district council websites as well as some of the third-party services on those websites, like, I don't know, applying for a parking permit, whatnot, right? Like all those services are actually based on different websites, but they need to look consistent. So we did that this sprint. We also made an agreement that we will just use system fonts like Helvetica and Arial for the main fonts, because the main font that's used by the Buckinghamshire Council branding is a licensed font, which makes it very difficult to consistently use across all these different websites. So we're trying to simplify that a little bit. So that's the work with the homepage. Next, libraries content area.
Okay, so for this sprint, we held a catch-up workshop with Zoe from the libraries team. We wanted to go through some of the bits that we had picked up before Christmas, just go over, make sure we were aware of what's going on. The workshop shed light on a couple of very, very important areas for us to look at. Firstly, that the services that the libraries section uses is spread out across a lot of different external platforms. As a result, we have to be very careful we don't start duplicating content across all those different platforms. Alongside that, what we did in that workshop was prioritise what we felt as the most important things to get ready for day one. And so we used the feedback and we used analytics to determine what we should do with that. Next, what did we do? We prioritised our user stories. So we looked at the user stories of the libraries and we put those in order of what things we think are most important, and we worked our way through that. And then we started taking some of the designs that we've created already and started to put them on our staging area. And this means that we can now go out and we can test in the library and we can test with users rather than clicking on sort of Marvel apps and prototypes that we've got. We've actually got real things for them to click on. And we then created additional designs. So what we did is with some things we've already got the templates for, that's absolutely fine. Other things like finding the library, we'll need new web page templates for it. So we started looking at how we can design those. And then this morning actually we conducted user research. We went out to the libraries back there. And we also did some maze testing, which is online testing where we sent out online things. People can do it from the comfort of their home, on their iPads, whatever, and complete some journeys. So prioritising user stories. I don't know if everybody knows what a user story is, but the Government Digital Service says user stories describe a user and the reason they need to use the service you're building. Essentially, user stories help us make sure the content of the pages that we design meet the needs of people who are using them to carry out a task. We break those down as who the person is, what they need from the service, and why they need it. By having these very, very strict sort of things, we can make sure that the people can use that the pages are very succinct and they do the thing that people want from them. An example of this from our library's workshop was, as a library user who's forgotten their PIN, I want to reset it so I can continue to use library services. That's a good idea of a single user story that we came up with. As part of our prioritisation, we found renewing a library loan and finding a library are the two main things that people would come into our website for. So they were the things that we were going to prioritise. Simplifying the user experience. This is our chance to start looking at current content, making it simpler. And so one of the common complaints about web pages from people is that they're too confusing, and what should be a very simple task feels like it's way too complicated. People don't read web pages the same way they read a book or a leaflet. What they do is usually they'll skim read a web page for relevant words and things that they know. So because we know that, the less content we can have on there, the more succinct it is, the easier it is for someone to do a task. Quite often we try to keep these absolutely just focused on that one task and put related tasks to the side. It saves people from thinking when they get to a page it's going to be more complicated than it actually should be. And lastly, so I said we were going to start creating additional designs, not radically different to what we've currently got, and these are just starting to look at it. But what we are doing is focusing on the hierarchy of needs, which is the opening times. Most people just want to know when the thing is open, and after that, where it is. We will also have on this page, we'll have things like the facilities there, whether they've got Wi-Fi, things like that. And we'll also have events that are going on there, things like that. So it will feature of those, but it's really important that, especially when mobile users come to the site, first thing they're going to see, that's when it's open, that's where it is.
They skipped over me. Cheeky. Hi everyone, I'm Jen. I haven't spoken at one of these before. I'm just going to talk a little bit more about the user testing that Stuart mentioned that we did this morning. So we went down to the library this morning. I think we spoke to about 8 users in total, and the idea was to ask them about whether they use the library site first of all, what they used it for, and to sort of walk them through the prototype of the new designs and the old site, and have them try and accomplish the kinds of tasks that they would use the library site for. And here are just some highlights of some of the findings. I think one of the interesting aspects of speaking to people this morning was what it really confirmed was how much the library is used beyond the getting out and the borrowing of books. We spoke to one user who was a housing officer who uses libraries to meet her clients, and she had, it was a really interesting use case. She had really particular needs, important needs about what she needed from what information she needed from the library website. Of course, we included a subtle diss to the old site. There's too much information on the old library site. It's too busy. Users seem to like the fact that the new site was more streamlined. The information was presented in a more concise and sort of linear fashion. They seem to like that. One of the first things you want to know is when it's open. Yeah, of course, users on mobile or what have you, they want to know when they can access the library facilities. And in general, people seem to find the new design, the information was easy to find. They seem to find it informative. It's pretty positive. Okay.
Thank you.
I need to ask Kev to change this. Tech support. Thank you.
There we go. There we go. Go large. Do you want to shrink it down
Yeah,
again?
just shrink
Yeah,
it,
shall
please.
I make it so?
Oh. Okay, thanks. I'm Nick. I'm here representing the developers who've been building this, the kind of the actual working version of the site rather than the demo version that we've been user testing. And the last 2 weeks in this sprint, we've been building the recruitment site. I don't know if this has been shown as a previous show and tell, but there's been designs floating around and iterated on for a few weeks now. And we've begun to make it work. Because it's just our first week or first sprint of working on this, we've kept the number of user stories we've addressed really small. The bulk of the work was involved in making sure, or all of them relied on having jobs listed on this site. So about half of all the work we did was just involved in fetching the jobs from the same source that the current site is listing its jobs at. And the user stories we wanted to achieve were that somebody could search for a job. So I'm going to pretend to be looking for a job. I'll have to look it up. Holmer Green, which is my favourite school. So if I... Oh, but there's too many there. So, I need to be able to search for exactly the right one. Another user story we then decided would be important was that we'd list all of the different categories on the homepage so people can begin to filter that way. If they want to see all the jobs we've got, then they can apply for something like 130 of them at the moment. But I specifically am interested in an early years teaching job at Holmer Green. So I'm going to filter by early years, and this hasn't opened yet. So, like I said, we've begun with a small scope, and there's things still to do on this. We've got lots of work we're still planning, but I can filter by early years, and then this is the really user-friendly bit of it. I have to type, and I also want to query Holmer. We only threw this up in the last day or two, but there we go. I finally got to my one job at Holmer Green, and then the next user story, beyond seeing the high-level details of this, was it's the main pay scale job, and it starts then. Is go and look at the full details. And all of this information is being pulled from the jobs API that the recruitment people in HR are using. In fact, I can show you exactly the same job at, is it this one?
It's the one just to the...
This one, thank you. So it's the same job, same listing, just presented totally differently now using our new design language. We're pulling in the same details and presenting them over on the side. We've got a big apply button which doesn't do anything yet, so it's just there to tantalise you with something that's on its way. The next things we're planning for this then are that, this is now there on a demo site, it's working, it's pulling all the information in from the API, and what we need to do is work closely with the people over in the recruitment department to say, exactly what do you need us to show here. I know they're planning some changes as well to add extra fields to their services so we can show logos and produce more kind of top level information. And then this apply button is going to turn into a feature where you can actually begin the application form on the site, save it, come back later when you're ready with more information. We've also been working a little bit on some summary pages about what the benefits of working in the county are, but they're just not ready to show yet. That's me.
Nice.
I'm done.
Thanks, Nick.
I think it's you again.
Is it me again? Crikey, it's brilliant. I'm going to hand off really quickly. So let's get the slideshow back. We do have some people viewing online, and they always love it when I do this bit and stare blankly into the YouTube stream. This is for you. Right, demo, we did that. Next step. So before I do that, I was just going to say hi to Tom from Torchbox, who's going to come and share some work that Torchbox have been doing recently. So Torchbox are building a lot of the stuff, working with us on this, but also kind of look after the content management system called Wagtail that sits under it. And I think you've got some updates, haven't you, on some of the work that's happening there. So shall I hand over to Tom? Yeah, mind the health and safety nightmare behind.
Hi everyone, so I'm going to crouch and look confusedly at all our YouTube videos too. And as Ben said, Wagtail is the tool that we're using to build this site. It's a content management system, so that's like Drupal or WordPress or other systems you might have used. Like those other ones, it's open source, so it's freely available for everyone to use. We at Torchbox created it 6 years ago, but it's now much bigger than Torchbox. It's the most popular Python content management system. Python's a programming language that runs underneath it. So as well as building sites like this, we also continue to work on Wagtail itself, making it better, hopefully for organizations like this. And one of the particular focuses of Wagtail, of our work on Wagtail recently, has been accessibility. So making Wagtail a tool that is easier to use for everybody. And I just wanted to show you some of those features. So they're not like precisely relevant to this project, but we hope that the improvements we're making will mean that this website will be accessible as both as a tool and in the site that it creates. Here I am on an old version of Wagtail. So this is what Wagtail looks like at the back end when you're managing content. And when we built it 4 or 5 years ago, we thought quite carefully about all the different colours and wanting something that was kind of bright and engaging, but also consistent. And but this is an old version which hasn't been updated for a while. Here's a newer version. And one thing that you might just notice as I flip between the two is the colours and the sizes. So there's quite a few changes here, and some of them are quite precise and small. But the main thing you'll notice is that we have a stronger contrast definition and some bigger text. And the reason I wanted to make this point is because when we first introduced this change, which came about after getting some more accessibility expertise, I felt a bit sad about it because I liked the sort of bright green and it felt kind of just lighter and nicer to use. But then what I noticed pretty quickly after spending time with the new one is that for my, healthy but 46-year-old eyes, this works better for me. The contrast is better, the legibility is better, and so on. And I guess I make that point because it's kind of at the heart of what we're trying to do around accessibility, and generally accessibility as a rule in web development is that making something work better for all users, but making something better for a specific group of users generally means that it's better for everyone. So it doesn't have to be that accessible designs are ugly or boring or plain. It can be that they're just better for everyone because the usability that you get for one group of people tends to end up as being better usability for everyone. As well as making Wagtail itself a more useful tool, and here is a very small screen that you can't read, but this is it's a detailed view about all the different parts of Wagtail which we're trying to improve and which we're turning from red to green. As well as making Wagtail itself a better tool, we want Wagtail to be something that helps people create accessible websites. So there's two kind of separate concepts. One is the tool that we use to manage our content. One is the output of that content and how can we make that an accessible website. And so there's a few different ways we've been thinking about that. And that's been perhaps the focus of this recent push that we organised an event around accessibility in our Bristol offices a couple of weeks ago. I just want to show you a couple of things on this. So I'm going to edit a page. And I'm going to go to the news section, and here's the story that we had before. If I edit this, I hope this is a little bit legible to some of you. I'll zoom in a little bit. And first thing I'll show is the preview. So once I've got my content in, and this is a page that already exists, then I can hit preview. And the first little feature here is the use of a tool called Totally, or the ALI is a kind of short version for accessibility, A11Y. And so I'm now previewing my content, but I can use this tool here as an editor to give me some clues about ways that I could be improving the accessibility of this page. So for example, I might look at contrast, and it immediately shows me that here this contrast is enough, but for this button the contrast isn't quite enough. And I can actually hit preview, and this probably will be too subtle to see on the screen, but that's showing me the difference between an accessible version and a less accessible version. Similarly, I can look at headings, and when you're constructing a page, a web page, the code that makes up the different sizes uses different levels. So at the top we have H1, and then underneath here we have a lot of H2 headings, and that's good. That's showing that the headings have been constructed correctly. But it's quite easy to break from that, because you might feel like, from a stylistic point of view, you want to have a larger heading lower down. That's confusing to people who are using the site through screen readers, and so this is a really clear way of helping editors make the correct choices around that. As well as, so some of these are a little bit outside the control of the editors, but things like contrast, because that would be something that the web developers would be conscious of. But generally we're keen to kind of bring these accessibility issues further to the fore and make them more immediate to the people who are actually creating content. The last thing I'm going to show you is around content generation itself. And we are keen to find ways of giving us feedback about our text. And accessibility doesn't just mean people who have vision difficulties, it's also people who have dyslexia or reading difficulties. And there's general advice, particularly for the level of accessibility that we're aiming for, to aim for reading age of 10 or 11. I mean, and there's various advice around this. But and so there are ways that we can give feedback to the editors about the reading age, and they're fairly crude measures. They're based on things like the number of words in a sentence and the length of words and so on, and subclauses. But they tend to be pretty accurate, and this is quite an established standard now that we can use. So here, we can see that we've got some long words, and the reading age is adult. If I start creating a new one, I had to do a few words before it kicks in. So you can see that it's giving me feedback on the age at the time. So we're keen to kind of keep finding ways of giving this immediate feedback to editors so that we can end up with a site that's accessible for everybody. That's me.
Thank you so much, Tom. That's great. So you'll have folks who've been to some of these show and tells before will know that kind of we've talked about accessibility quite a lot, and quite a lot of the decisions we've taken around. So, for example, the difference between the old job site and the new job site. The current one we have now won't pass the accessibility regulations at the point they need to later this year. So we would have had to have made some changes anyway. And that kind of stark contrast is picking up a lot of the stuff that Tom's just talked about. And for our developers, our editors or our content designers, having in-browser tools like that is hugely advantageous. They are working on thousands of words a day, and having to jump out to a Word document, run an accessibility check, run a reading age score, jump back into your content management system to write it is a real pain. So having it kind of in line like that is just, yeah, I think huge fans. So we're up against the end of the half hour. Nobody stopped us or asked any questions, so do ask at the end when we've done. So next steps. We are back into planning and prioritisation again on Monday. So see, we've still got to finish up some bits and pieces that we've been talking about today. But our focus now really comes into some of the things that are absolute must-haves for day one. So we've got quite a long list now of things coming in from other bits of the organisation. And these range from kind of policy statementy stuff, the constitution, a new corporate plan, really important kind of big documents we've got to get published. How we're going to handle people who need to contact us or complain about something to us. That's quite complicated, so we need to kind of figure out the right way of routing people through to the right spots. How we're going to do kind of marketing communications. So there's obviously a whole kind of work stream of folks looking at how we have ongoing kind of contact with residents. We probably need to capture some information about them, kind of email maybe, so that we can send them stuff they might be interested in. So how that's going to work, we haven't built yet, so we'd need to have a think about that. Stuff to do with localism, community access points, so kind of buildings, all the buildings we've got, and how people can do different things there. Some of our planning policies starting to get aligned for day one, which is great. So some of the stuff to do with pre-application advice. We kind of have one version of that now, so it'd be lovely if that might be something we could have. Don't know if we can do it all, so we're going to have to do a kind of strict kind of prioritisation and ranking, and start letting folks in the organisation as well know a bit more about when they're likely to have their thing kind of looked at, just so that we can get expectations all kind of levelled away. So yeah, I think that's pretty much it from us. Next show and tell, 2 weeks time, 20th of Feb. Tell your friends, come along. We might try and do a big push at some point and maybe host this in one of the big mezzanine rooms and see if we can't kind of fill a little stadium of folks. But this is fab. This is like one of the biggest local gov digital show and tells I've probably ever been to. So well done and thanks for coming. So any questions for anyone who's kind of talked today? Nothing.
Can I ask?
Yeah.
Well, last time I looked at the website was a few weeks ago. Is the link to the careers job site on that front page now?
No, I don't think so.
Not yet, but we have done that in our testing now, so we're aware that we want to probably put a link in the footer as well as one of the categories.
I have a question.
Go for it.
How are you kind of liaising with various people around the organisation about having policies that are accessible?
Oh, it's my favourite topic right now. I'm taking heat, to be honest. So word's got out that Ben's banned PDFs, which is not strictly true, but it's not an unhelpful thing to have floating around either. So the way we traditionally do this is policies are created in an area. Colleagues will then publish them with whatever desktop tools they've got available to them, which frankly for most people is kind of Word, maybe some lightweight editing software, and then throwing a thing into a PDF and getting it up on a website. So we don't help ourselves because we haven't got the best tools always in people's hands. So what we need to do now, because of these new accessibility regs, is literally anything that gets published to our new website. So whether it's the words on the web page, which is the ideal because that's the most accessible way of doing it, have it as HTML content on a web page. But if we do publish some PDFs, those also need to be structured in a particular way. Looking at Jackie, you're working on this right now, aren't you? Bless you. They have to be structured in the same way that Tom was describing, where there's a heading is a heading, a subheading is a subheading, body text is body text. And there's a structural way of doing that then means it can be viewed by screen readers. PDFs are not ideal for loads of reasons. They're not least they're rubbish in smartphones. My phone's over there. You've got to kind of pinch and zoom, and you can't search through them. So one of the things on our list, that kind of policy statements bit, we would like to. I'll tell you what, actually, I think I've got it in the browser. Let me show you half an idea as an example. So this is something that is in development down in Brighton at the moment. A colleague down there has kind of sent me a link to something they're playing with. And so this is their corporate plan, but could be a constitution, could be a policy, could be any long form content. And it's in the web, it's of the web. So this is all good old fashioned kind of HTML. It's all sectioned out nicely. So each section got little call outs as well, so if you want to emphasize particular bits, but this is all accessible. It all works really nicely on a mobile device as well. And importantly, the download our plan as a PDF here, what that isn't doing is taking a PDF document that someone's uploaded. The plan for that is it's going to take all of that HTML and create a PDF. That is accessible, but is also the most recent version of whatever's been published. So you don't lose all that version control as well. Yeah, so that's where our heads are at, and we're thinking, but we've not done any design work, we've not done any testing, and we've not got a huge amount of time to solve this, so we just need to figure out what's a sensible way to kind of approach this for day one. But yeah, there's a bigger conversation to be had about how we do kind of document creation, expectations for things getting published online, the kind of rules we have to meet, but also what's useful. Like if people have got really good, interesting stuff buried in these PDF documents and nobody's looking at them, they can't find them. If they do, when they open them, they're a nightmare to read. So we've got thousands published at the moment, and a lot of them are never downloaded, never looked at, never opened. They're just lost content. So yeah, big focus. Sorry, yeah, this is a hobby horse, I think, for a lot of us now. I'm sorry, and I know Jackie's going through at the moment, creating accessible versions of how many?
I'm only doing forms, and there's
only forms?
over 170 on just the Buck site.
And that's just forms. So that's just the really important, somebody has to apply for something with this form bits of PDF. So yeah, it's a big old task. Or any more for any more? Right. Hang around afterwards. If you're too shy to ask, we'll be here for a bit. Okay, thank you so much, everyone.